All right, so I had a request on Patreon to make a video discussing how I approach painting trees. I think for beginning painters, painting trees and shrubs can be really difficult, and I certainly struggled with it when I started out. One of the things I noticed when I painted trees was that I just didn't make them dark enough. A lot of times if you look at them and compare them to the sky, most trees, they're pretty dark, even the light portions, even where the foliage is hit by the sun. So that's something to keep an eye out for. But basically when I paint trees, I approach them the way I approach any subject, which is I'm just looking for an interesting composition, and then I paint from dark to light. So I'm looking for areas of dark, lay those in, and then work towards the light. But I've got some notes here, so I will talk about some key things that I focus on when I'm painting trees. Number one is composition. Typically I will not put a tree, obviously right in the middle of a panel or a canvas. So I'm looking for an interesting arrangement of shapes. That can be with the foliage and where the trunks are, the branches are. So obviously composition is huge. So I really think about the composition and the placement of the trees, especially if the tree is the main focus. So that's number one, making sure you've got a good composition before you start. And also number two would be looking for an interesting silhouette. Like I said, typically the trees are darker, so I'm looking for an interesting pattern or silhouette against the sky. That's super important. Looking for also the cast shadow on the ground. A lot of times when there are shadows on the ground, we overlook those shadows. That's really important to notice that. The shadows on the ground are kind of what anchors the tree to the ground, I have found. And so I always look for those shadows. And then sky holes. You don't want the tree to be a solid mass. Look for areas of openness through the trees where you might get a little bit of a view of a branch or something, but then you can see the sky behind that. Having that openness and that airiness in your tree will also make it seem less like it's pasted on or it's like a cutout that's just adhered to your canvas. And then the last thing is not to make your tree shapes or your shrub shapes too uniform. A lot of times we do that. Just really embrace the irregularities of the trees. Look for those irregular patterns. We do tend to, as humans, want order, and so we will clean them up or simplify them to the point where they just don't look as random and chaotic as they do in real life, which is part of what makes them wonderful. So those are the key points, but let's take a look at a painting that I did in Bakersfield about a year ago that I was really happy with. It was just a quick sketch of a eucalyptus tree, so let's take a look. All right, so let's go through the checklist. Number one, composition. So obviously I put the tree off to the left here, and I liked also how there were trees in the distance. So I just liked the arrangement of these shapes. And then also I liked how there was this kind of pathway or road that went off into the distance. As far as an interesting silhouette, I liked this sort of outline of the tree, and that's what I sketched in first. I just kind of sketched in with burnt sienna. Typically I would do that with ultramarine and alizarin crimson, kind of a purple color that I would sketch it in with, but I can see that I didn't do that up here. Maybe a little bit, there's a little trace of it right there. But it doesn't really matter as long as you establish that interesting silhouette. That was step two. Step three, there is a strong cast shadow. So that was something that, like I said, that anchors the tree to the ground. And another thing I'd say about the cast shadow is keeping it sort of irregular and keeping the edges sort of like irregular edges on the shadow, and then also in the shadow areas of, warm and cool. And so it's not just this really dark shadow, but you can actually see into it. So there are areas of dark, but then areas where it's a little bit lighter, some variety in there. There are some sky holes in the tree, so it does have that open feeling. And then finally, again, we're looking for irregular shapes. One other thing I would say too is, I tend to try to keep it soft where the sky meets the tree. All right, so now I'm going to do a 20 by 20 inch painting of a cypress tree from down in Pacific Grove, California. And I'm going to be painting on a 20 by 20 inch canvas. And it's a fine linen. It's like a fine tooth linen and very absorbent. To be honest, not crazy about the surface, but let's give it a go. Okay, so I am sketching using number 2 natural bristle brush, and I'm sketching in burnt sienna. I've thinned the burnt sienna with some odorless mineral spirits. And as you can see, I've just sort of roughly outlined where the trees are. So it's almost like sculpture in a way. I start large and then sort of, hone in on details. So the first thing is just to look at the trees as one mass, more or less, just kind of get the outline of where the foliage is. Then I can start indicating where the trunks are and the branches are. I find that putting in or indicating the branches early on is really helpful, and I'm gonna try to also get some detail as far as the edges of the foliage where it meets the sky, but a lot of that's going to be worked out when I finally do come in with the darks, which I'm doing right here using ultramarine and alizarin crimson. So usually what I start with, because a lot of times it does seem like there's a bluish purple color in the shadows on the trees. Sometimes I lean that more towards alizarin crimson, so there's more red in it, which complements the green of the foliage that's in the light. But in any case, what I'm looking for now is a strong silhouette. So I'm squinting at the trees, at the, I'm squinting at the trees, and I'm trying to reproduce the dark silhouette that I see. And then I will come in afterwards and I will put in some areas that are darker and some areas that are lighter. But by establishing that silhouette, that's really the composition. So once I get that established, I know whether the painting is going to work or not. And then the rest is just filling in, the color, which is pretty simple in this case. The water is one color, the sky is pretty close to one color, the grass too. All that's simple. The big work here is just getting an interesting silhouette and an interesting tree shape. And the thing here you can see is the way I'm sketching, I'm trying to leave openings that I'll come in with later and add sky color. A lot of times when people paint trees, they paint them as these solid blocks. But, it's really helpful to leave openings in the trees where you can see the sky. I've read people refer to that as sky holes. But, for the first period of time that I was painting, when I first started, I wouldn't even look for those, and I just paint solid trees, which doesn't look so good. Doesn't look real. All right, so as far as the time lapse goes, I just wanted to cover the silhouette and the composition, but let's take a look at the finished painting. All right, so here is the finished product, and like I said, after I established the silhouette, putting in the surrounding colors was kind of fun. It wasn't particularly difficult. I did look to have kind of an irregular pattern for this path here that leads over towards the ocean. And what else? There's certain things compositionally I did. I kind of de-emphasized these really bright rocks in the background. They were much lighter in the photograph. And as far as like the looseness of this, I really wish that it was looser. I found that with this fine linen, this could be good for painting portraits, but for painting a landscape, I think I'd like to use maybe a medium weave, something a little bit heavier with more tooth and less absorbent. But in any case, like I said, I'm happy with the composition. So overall, not bad. And then something I'll also point out, which I pointed out on the other painting as well, is trying to keep the edges where it meets the sky, trying to keep that soft. And as you can see here, obviously I came in with some green on top of the dark, which it definitely gives the trees a feeling of 3 dimensions when you've got that. You've got the darks in the background and then the warmer foliage on top. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a comment or question down below. As usual, a big thanks to my Patreon supporters. It's the Patreon support that keeps me making these videos. If you're interested in pitching in, there's a link down below. Also on my Patreon page, I have a bunch of extra videos, just sort of informational stuff, a supply list PDF with links, that sort of thing. So anyway, like I said, Patreon link in description. Other than that, stay creative, and I'll see you guys in the next video.